Alright everybody, I think it's been about the 10 minutes or so, so we'll get started. Welcome to yet another React Meetup. I dragged my feet on this one a little bit. It was probably supposed to be in December, but December's kind of a hard month to do just about anything, so here we are, February, still getting it done. I think we have a good lineup tonight. I'm actually presenting tonight, so I have a secret confession to make. That's the teaser for that one. So without further ado, we get started. Jordan?
Hey, what's up guys? My name is Jordan. I am a software engineer here at Visionist, and I'm going to be talking about Reach Router tonight. So for those of you that have a lot of chops, you've done React for a long time, or even just single page apps, you know what routing is in the client, and Reach Router is one of the ways that it is. It's really not that complicated, but it is very different from like traditional routing on a server where you would make calls back to your server every single time you click a button or do an action. So the app I'm running right here is built with Parcel.js, which is similar to Create React App. It's really lightweight and easy to make demos. So if you haven't used it before, I recommend checking it out. It's really nice, and I've just got like a core app that I use for any time I want to prototype something or anything like that. So let's look at the intro here. So I'm not going to get into anything really complicated. I'm just going to talk about general navigation, kind of keep it at a higher level for maybe people who haven't done this kind of thing before or kind of new to React. URL parameters, query parameters, things like that. Just the basics of SPA routing. So the application itself is built pretty standard. I've got just like my index here with my app that I'm using React on render for. And if we go into the app, you can see all I've really done is import this dependency, which is Reach Router.
So did you increase the font size a bit bigger?
Oh, yeah. Do you guys know how to do that? It's under view.
Command Shift plus.
There you go.
Thank you.
Better? Okay.
That's great, yeah.
So yeah, just import the router. You're using the router object here, and you're just providing a bunch of components that are within it. So it's really simple to use, and some of you might have used React Router. So Reach Router is, I'll get into some of the differences later on, but the core of it is you bring in your component and you add a path property onto it with whatever constant you want to represent the path to that component. So you can see intro, path is intro, and if I go back, you can see my route. It's real tiny up there, but it says intro/intro right there. And so for example, if I've got something else I want to load, like an image or a logo, the React MD logo, it's the same thing going on up here where it's just the path right there. And for example, for this one, all I'm doing is I've just got like a little constant right here, returning back some JSX with a link and an image. So really, really simple stuff, really not too bad. Another example would be if you have a component that you're importing, like just this little counter that I wrote here where you click to add. I'm doing the exact same thing here with this counter view component, and it's exactly the same thing. So there's a little preview of some other stuff you're going to see tonight. Some hooks there. And so now that's just basic navigation. It's following the context route, and then the router will route it along to whatever component it wants to render on the page. And continuing with that, this one, and I didn't realize that the font would be so tiny, but it's hard to see. Up here I have, let's copy that out. I have this. So preset counter, that's navigating to my component, and I'm appending on query parameters to that. So this is how you would do that, and you just have a value here, and in the component, what's going to happen is, and this is where we started to get into some of the differences between React Router and Reach Router, I actually have to bring in a library to parse the query string. So every single time a component's rendered, you're going to have access to what's called the location And if there's any parameters there, that'll be under search. So all I have to do is pass in those props to the query string parser, and then I'm going to get back whatever I was assigned there. So for this one, I put 5, and then the rest of it is the exact same. I just set some state. And you can see here, that's loaded in as 5. Now, for example, I could change this and set it to 100, but I'm not going to get the advantages of the router. So I don't know if you guys saw that, but on the right side here, it actually did another network request. So if I change it again, so what's going to happen is that reach router is going to, you're actually going to make a GET request from your browser, which is going to go to your dev server, which I'm running here with Parcel, and then reach router is going to navigate the URL to the proper component that needs to be rendered. So that's important to note with SPA rendering, or SPA routing, is that you're actually, all of your navigation is happening on the client whenever you're interacting with buttons or links or anything like that. Whereas if you were to change the URL, you're going to do another GET, and then reach router will have to render back down through to whatever component it's supposed to be showing. And that's the basics for query parameters. If you weren't able to tell before, link is the way that you're actually able to wrap all of that so that you can navigate within your app. It's part of reach router's component library, so they have this link that you're able to use, and you just put your to, that's going to navigate to whatever path you want to in your router. So if we go back to the app, all of those links that say back to home just say path home or path slash. That's going to render the content component here. And then the last thing that I wanted to look at was the the URL parameters. So this is a way that you're able to append things into the URL, similar to query parameters, and use those as props, and reach router will actually give you those as props. So I'll show you how that works by, I just need to do a little copy pasting. I didn't want you guys to see this until later on. So I don't know if you guys have played any Team Fortress 2 before, any TF2 fans, but so what I've done here is I've just got a little drop down, and when I click on one and click go, it's going to inject that as a parameter into the URL. So if I click go, I go to this other page, and you can see up here, you can't see it, but it says class medic. So like that, and what's going to happen when I click on one of these, like this, is that in content, in my button, I have a link. So I'm going to route to class/name, and name is going to just be set in state on this select drop down that I'm using from AntD. It's a component library. So on change, I call set name, that updates my state, and I pass in a name to the link. And what happens is that parameter I defined earlier on in my app.jsx. So in my router, I said there's going to be a parameter after class called name. So in my class view component that I'm routing to, all I have to do is expect a prop called name to come in. And then based on that name, I just figure out which image to show, and then just Pascal case the prop that I got called name. And that's a really easy way to just do URL parameters like that. So I don't know if you guys have any favorite classes or anything, but obviously the Pyro is the best class. Anyway, so that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you guys. URL, query parameters, basic navigation. So you might say, what's one of the reasons I should use this router over React router? It has a ton of accessibility stuff built into it automatically. Things like the links, it's really simple to use. I think that's a big thing because routing can get really complex when you've got a lot of nested routes. And if you guys want any other info, the Reach Router site is here, and they've got a bunch of examples. Their examples are really good. So it has a bunch of code sandbox like stuff here that you can look at. And I will say that one thing, oh, here we go. This is really good. So one thing I'll say is that it's not as fully featured as React Router. So there's some trade-offs with, if you need something simple that's easy to use, Reach Router is really nice. If you need something that's really fleshed out, that has a lot of capabilities, then React Router might be a little bit better. So yeah, size is also really good. I forgot about that one. But that's pretty much everything. If you want to know more about me, you can follow me on Twitter or my GitHub account, JMLeap. But that's pretty much everything. Any questions?
So did you choose React Router or Reach Router versus React Router after like a trade study between the two, or did you run into an issue that you then saw out an alternative to sort of a standard?
I was looking for an easy way to do routing, and I read about Reach Router. Actually, I talked to Dylan about Reach Router, and he recommended it. So after experimenting with it, I thought it might be a good topic to talk about for people that might not have any experience with client-side routing. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. Maybe.
Alrighty, so my name is Chris Cavey. You guys have probably seen me here if you've been to any of these before. You've seen me, I'm always up here introducing everybody and like saying how awesome React is, except we've got a little bit of problem. I've got a little bit of a confession to make. I've never used React at all in any capacity, like at home, at work. I've just never used it yet. Here I am like, yay, React! It's kind of, yeah. So it's about time that I give it a go. And I asked one of the guys I worked with who that was, and he didn't know. And then I was like, oh, I'm kind of old. Does anybody know who it is? Am I the only? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I had a little panic attack at work today. So having said that, I feel like I have to back that up a little bit. Like I do have a little bit of development chops, some street cred here. Like I've been doing this for a little bit of time. I've worked on all sorts of crazy Java swing apps. I don't know if Filthy Rich Clients, anyone? That kind of dates me. Crazy SPA based on some custom jQuery stuff that Matt Loff wrote a bunch of at one point. It had lifecycle methods and components and everything else. And, well, now it's getting all rewritten in React. Then a bunch of back-end stuff. And look, even now, I am back on Java Swing, and it's still a thing. Did somebody clap for that? So I'm just going to go through a couple Swing things that I did. Like I have written UIs before. Maybe it doesn't look like Java, maybe it does, and it's obvious to all of you that it's crappy Java. But it's some pretty cool stuff. We can talk about what it actually does later if you're interested. But,
Is that metal?
No, that's a custom look and feel that we actually licensed on that particular project. Some other stuff. That one is all custom rendered stuff, which was pretty cool 10 years ago. Now it's not really. Some more 3D stuff. So this is all UI work that I've done. I have done UI work. I have done things, just not React. So my current life goal is to bring this Swing app that I'm working now on into this decade, even though I don't know React or anything else, but I'm going to convince my customer that we should do this. And like I said, lots and lots of Googling, which I was doing frantically last night, trying to make sure all of this stuff worked. Most of the stuff I do always starts with my hobbies. I find that it's the easiest way to a new technology. Like on-the-job training is great, but sometimes the stuff you do at home you actually care more about because you're passionate about it. So I am huge into home automation. And then I listed off a bunch of stuff like Z-Wave. If you've never heard any of the stuff, it doesn't matter. If you want me to talk about it at length, come talk to me. I can just go on and on about it. So Z-Wave, Home Assistant, these are all things that I have running at home. And of course, Golang, I actually got introduced to that early on that older jQuery SPA project. Also microcontrollers, I tend to collect them for no good reason and run them and just waste power because it's fun. Go again, mechanical keyboards, and I trolled myself on this one. Maybe I remembered to bring one, I didn't. So there's some around here if you want to see one. Go again, because single binaries are amazing. Just a single nice 20 meg binary that does everything. Oh, it's so good. And then containerizing lots of things. So yeah, it's not related to any of the Java Swing work I do whatsoever. But again, this goes back to the hobby thing, that I'm more passionate about tech when it's part of my hobbies. So we're going to give that a shot. I'm going to write this basic, super basic front end to this Golang app that I have at home that runs my Z-Wave controller. It talks over serial ports and does some custom protocol stuff. Not important. Not important at all. What is important, though, is I'm going to write a front end to it in React. Yeah. And then maybe Zavin out in the audience is saying, why don't I just use Home Assistant? Or maybe Enrique says, just use HomeKit for everything. But that's not fun. So I'm just going to write stuff myself and toil away till the wee hours in the morning doing that. So the first thing I thought was, well, Enrique doesn't like create React apps, so I'm going to use that one. You're sitting right here, man. So for anybody who's not familiar, create React app is an easy way just to sort of bootstrap your React development. It spews out a bunch of stuff and configuration and everything else. I didn't read through all of it because it's not my thing. I don't know what's going on in there. I just knew I could get something going in like 5 minutes. And then Enrique said, no. You got to use Parcel. Parcel is the best. And I tried it. I really did, except it failed in one specific case. And I have an ideological disagreement with the developers of Parcel. We'll duke it out one day, but not today. So yeah, I picked Create React App, and I think it got me going pretty fast. And specifically, I'm now doing sort of a mixed stack development, right? I've got a Golang app, I've got Node going with React in it, so I wanted all of that to work together seamlessly, which turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. And then in the end, I wanted to embed all of the React stuff into the Go binary so I could, again, ship that awesome 20 meg binary with no dependencies on anything else, or put it into a really small container or something like that. So here's the basic setup I was going with, right? I'm running Node with really no backend at this point other than like some Webpack proxy stuff. And then the API subpath is going to go right to my Golang server. This is crucial for making all of this work to me. Turns out that it was really easy to make this go and create React app, but not Parcel. And then, like I said, in production, I just want to have the Golang binary. And fun trivia fact, the node color up there is like the React blue, the official React blue, and the Golang one is the Go blue. So fun fact right there. So some of the stuff that I had to do to get this to go, and this is where I know you can do this with Parcel, it just wasn't immediately obvious. So I have to make that API URL route to my application. And in the case of Create React App, all I had to do was pop in this proxy link right there. And anything that Create React App doesn't resolve, it proxies through to my host. So that's awesome. That goes straight to my Go binary where I have some HTTP stuff to, well, you'll see later what it exactly does. And then this next part really killed me. That was the hardest one to figure out. And by hardest, I mean like half an hour or so. Create React App wants to use absolute URLs for everything that it does, which is not awesome for embedding the UI in anything else. I can't have it doing absolute URLs when I want to host it somewhere else. And then backend-wise, I use Gin and Packer to embed all of that stuff in the Go binary. So this is it. There's going to be 2 slides. This is all I wrote. This is the app that does some things. So when I was doing this, at first I did write it with lifecycle methods and classes, and that's, I guess, not the new hotness. So I had to use hooks. I guess, right? Hooks. So I'm using hooks to do this. Page loads. I grab nodes. You're going to see what nodes are in a minute from my home automation server. Sort them, which I could have done on the back end. I probably will do on the back end at some point, so push that logic somewhere else. And then update the state with set nodes method right there, use state, set nodes. And I have these two little functions down here, on and off, which are going to turn lights on and off at my house. And here's the actual render content. I guess is that the best way to say it? Render content, render function. What's the term? Render function. Okay. So I'm iterating over my nodes. I didn't include any CSS up here because it's super vanilla flex grid stuff. It's not special in any way. We're just going to focus on the React pieces. So you're going to see a bunch of nodes rendered in a list with buttons to click them on and off. That's it. That's my app. It does exactly what I wanted it to do, and it really only took me a night, and I was doing it, of course, last night because engineers do things at the last minute. Oh, here we go. That's what the app looks like. I mean, don't believe me, I can refresh it. That is running in my house right now, and no, you can't just bring it up and browse to it. It's behind two-way SSL and using my certs, so you can't start turning lights on and off at my house. So yeah, each one of these is one of the list elements in a flex grid. Like I did it that way, so it looks fine on the phone.
How come some of them don't have title?
Yes, so those titles are sort of an artifact of my own UI, my own server design thing. Some of them are sensors, some of them are temperature sensors, some of them are motion sensors, some of them are like swipe panels and things in the house that aren't switches. So the ones you're seeing that have labels and have enabled on and off buttons are actual switches in my house. I wired them, they're switches. We're going to turn some lights on and off in a minute. Hopefully my family is not eating dinner or don't notice the lights going on and off. I don't know, we'll see.
Did you warn them?
I did, I warned them. If I get a phone call in the middle of it, I'm in trouble. And I admit the UI could be a lot better, right? Like this isn't styled that well. It was one night. So, at home, I also run a bunch of other things. Among those is some cameras around the premises. So what you're seeing right now is front door of the house and my wife's car in the driveway. And it just so happens that this porch light is terribly taking over too much of the field of view of the camera because I made poor choices when I put the cameras up. So this one is external front because I don't have a good name. It should have been porch. Porch is something else. So we're going to hit on. Fingers crossed that light actually turns on. Woohoo! Let me turn it off. Come on. Yes. So the rest of them are actually functional lights. Kitchen, dining room. I don't know. I think it's past. There's two switches in the dining room for different lights. They might be eating dinner. I don't know. We could turn off the lights on them or turn out the stairs, freak them out. But we're not going to do that. So the demo actually worked. No, not share. So remember that swing app that I talked about? We're actually in the process right now. We somehow managed to sell the customer on trying to do some prototypes with React. And we're actually going to start using Electron and some WebSockets. So we're building in lots of fancy buzzword technologies, but not machine learning, blockchain. I just wanted to say it. After my experience with React, I'm pretty confident and excited that we can actually put together a decent application. And this is after one night. So it's pretty easy. I encourage everyone to try it. I'm sure all of you have, and you're way beyond me, but this is where I am. And it worked. Awesome. That's it. Any questions?
Got one slide, man. There's another slide.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Full circle. Full circle.
What kind of refresh rate do you think we can get on that porch light?
It's under 1 hertz, but not
So not like disco strobe.
No.
Do you have your own hub where you run and like smart things?
Not smart things. I have a USB Z-Wave stick that's doing most of that because my backend piece that I didn't show here is doing all that protocol talk, and it has the basic web
So
server in it.
Where you get the API out of?
Yeah.
To talk to.
Yeah.
I don't do have 4 lights. There were only like 30 things. Very disappointing.
I don't need more. I don't have that many. Not all the lights are on there. Like the bedroom lights aren't on there. The bathroom lights aren't on there. We just don't. I don't know. Don't need to be automated. I don't know.
So I'm assuming you,
What's that? Yeah, it could be. So the problem is I have 2 kids at home who love to turn things on and off, and I need to hide that stuff from them.
so I'm assuming you already had the ability to do all this, or is this recent where you wired everything? So I'm assuming you already had a different app where you could turn things on and off, yes?
So I could run this in that other app I mentioned, Home Assistant, or I could do smart things. Like there's a bunch of different things I could use, and they would probably work reliably and all the time. But I choose to do this custom thing
Well, that's
because
what I was going
I'm
to ask you,
difficult.
moving forward, are you going to fancy this up and use it, or do you think you're just...
Oh, this has been running in my house for months. It has some automation rules and runs. I like this one better than Home Assistant's Z-Wave support. And it's my hobby, right? It's DIY. I like doing it versus I could just plop down lots of money for like a Crestron system or something and be done with it. But this is fun for me. I like to rewire switches.
Do you see any advantage in using WebSockets for this?
Yes. If I had to complete this, I would absolutely use WebSockets for it. The events in Z-Wave are very asynchronous. When you submit a command, say turn on light, you might not get feedback that the light actually turned on for another second or so. You could pull it, or you can wait for events. I would like to have some sort of state. You notice there's no state in this. Like if the light's on or off, I don't know. I can keep clicking on and keep sending on commands. I have no idea. So yeah, if I had state, I would definitely have an asynchronous feedback mechanism. So send back those events over WebSockets and light up a light bulb or something, turn them yellow. I don't know. Make it look more like HomeKit.
Now you just need to configure it so you can open and close your garage.
I think that one is. That's what that one's supposed to do, but it's not wired on purpose. Yeah, that one's not a light. That one's it's a relay that presses buttons in the garage. All good? Who next? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah. You can rock, paper, scissors, do whatever. Here we go. All right, everybody. What do you need?
HDMI, that's about it.
And everybody, this is Kedwin. Super excited. He is
Hey guys.
not a visionist person who's presenting. I'm always excited when that happens. Well, you can give everybody grab some more pizza, grab a drink or something while he plugs things in here. All right, everybody. I think we're going to get started again. I think Kedwin's all ready to go. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So this is just a brief introduction of Redux. I'm not sure if you guys know much about it, but hopefully it's going to be short and sweet, and hopefully you guys get started with Redux inside your React application. So a little bit about me. I'm a JS developer. I love React. That's what I do the most. Do some Node, start with Redux, and then as you can see here, I did Angular and I did Java in the past. Not as important to me anymore because of what I do now. So here's the roadmap. So we're going to talk about the store in Redux, the actions, as well as the reducers. These are just very confusing words, but I promise you it's very simple. And then afterwards, we're going to do a live demonstration of it. So to begin, the store is literally just a JavaScript object that holds the state of your application. Using this, you can actually access the store or your state of your application wherever your components are. So you can have a done component buried into 10 levels deep of your actual in your actual application, and you can still access it through Redux. And then again, just here, just basic imports of you accessing Redux by create store and just calling it. Don't worry about this part so much because that is just a parameter for create store. So the actions. So actions are just payloads of information that's sent from the user over to the store. So I did a little representation of the payload in Overwatch of them moving the information over. Hopefully your information doesn't get attacked because otherwise you have a lot of other problems. So a little bit more about actions. So the actions are just JavaScript objects as well, but you just need a type as a key value pair. That's the only thing that requires. So here's a basic one. Just the type is greet guest and then say hello. Reducers. Reducers are just functions. Functions that actually move the actions over into the store. So as you see, I did a little demonstration of Didi actually pressing the button, not sure what it actually does, but the reducer would actually call the function over. And then for a reducer example, as you can see, it's very, very basic. You have your initial state, and then the function is your reducer. So I'm going to do a live code demonstration of the Redux. Can everyone see that? So we're going to just go ahead and start here. So to begin, we're going to call initial state or default state, let's say. I'm going to pass in a user. And then let's say that user has no admin, so it's false. Let's go ahead and call the store. So call it store. And then we pass a parameter, which is going to be a reducer. Let's do authentication. So let's say user auth. Let's console. Okay, so here's the basic setup. So we already have the default state of what the application should have in terms of a user. So whenever your application actually starts, it goes ahead and creates a state of user unknown and admin false. So we have no user logged in. And then we have a store, which is actually storing the state of our application. So let's go ahead and create this reducer, which is just a function. Let's use a switch statement. If you guys are not familiar with switch statements, they're just if-else statements. And then we're going to pass in the action.type. Now for our reducers parameters, we would have to call in the state and as well as the action. Oh, sorry, yep. So the first case, we'll say user logged in. And then we want to return the new state, which would be user, say hello, Kevin. And then in case the user is not logged in, we'll send the default, which would be just the state of the application. Oh, and I forgot one more thing. So in case the user authentication doesn't have a state, we would like to pass in the default state. So we can go ahead and just say equals default state. Okay, and then what should happen is that we should see in the okay, so now you see your state here is shown as unknown. So we're going to actually pass a payload over there. So we go store.dispatch and pass in an object. User logged in. Then what should happen is it should pass, yep, hello Kedwin. As you see here, there's another issue is that the state is actually being replaced by the state not being passed correctly. So to fix this issue, we would just have to use the spread operator in ES6 by using ... state, comma, and that what that should do is that it should return the state along with the replacement of the user. And that's it. So that is just the basic of Redux. Here's my information in case you want to talk about dev work and all that stuff. I'm on Discord as well as my email address. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about Redux, just the very beginnings of it. There's a lot of things you can do with it. It's really good stuff. So thank you guys. Any questions? Yeah.
Is that Discord name from Redscape?
It's not.
So I have a question. So the creator of Redux, Dan Abramov, kind of recently, like a year ago, wrote a post called "You Might Not Need Redux," or probably don't need Redux. I think that's how we called it. But he brought up an interesting point because that discussion has kind of happened around like 2 years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago or so. It was kind of assumes if you're starting new React projects, you should obviously use Redux. Like obviously, why wouldn't you? And I think that there's been a little bit of a pendulum swinging the other way of like actually vanilla React is pretty capable on its own. You might not need Redux, like Dan Abramov said. I mean, do you have like any thoughts around that, or like a sense in which like, because we talked about on my team like using Redux not, and like I think some people feel like the overhead that comes in everything you do in your application when you have to kind of pass it all through Redux, it has like an incremental level of complexity. It's kind of any one single thing you might want to do. But there's a trade-off, and then it's a lot easier to understand what's happening in the state. You can have like state kind of happening a lot of different places. And React's tried to solve that problem in context and some other things. So sorry, that's a lot. I'm just curious as someone who obviously is comfortable with Redux. Do you have any thoughts on kind of when from your perspective in today's React world with hooks and context, like when is still like a good use case for using Redux?
So from my personal experience for using Redux is actually in one of my applications I started building. And the issue I had in the beginning was how do I pass the user's object, especially when I'm using something like Passport and grabbing all these authentications, or I say like the bearer token. So how do I pass that into certain parts of my application without actually kind of cascading it?
Without passing it through a million.
Yeah, a million. So it gets very confusing. The application gets so big. It's like, why should I cascade all my information when I can just have it in a state somewhere centralized, and then I can access it any time I want to. So that's the reason why I use it. I can see
Because I think
the
I think
argument.
that part of the problem they try to solve the context is the prop drilling. So,
Yes.
Yeah. So like that's like what that was. I haven't used context a ton, so I was kind of that's kind of the open question I had is like trying to figure out the new stuff that they've been putting out. Like does Redux like have certain use cases that still like, address problems?
Right. Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you use Saga as anything like it? And do you give tips for that?
I do not. I'm still very new to the Redux. I'm still getting used to it. I wish I had the answer.
It's a life cycle, professional, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I need to look that up. Thank you.
Sagas is super rad. I got to years ago, and I've migrated every project I've touched to Sagas.
Okay.
You can cancel asynchronous events. You don't need to wait for them to finish. Full stop. It'll change that.
You should give a talk on Saga at its next meetup.
Yeah, sure. Give it a watch here. Nice work.
Sweet.
It was at the Germ City meetup. This is the first one.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys.
Just want to keep right on rolling. Everybody good? All right. All right. Right?
Whoa. That's not right. Do you know how to fix this problem?
What resolution do we have?
Set it lower.
Oh, no, you're a 1080p. I don't know.
Oh, that's better. That's more better. Okay, so
Dylan, everybody.
kind of funny. This is not what I'm talking about tonight. This is what I talked about the last meetup. I have some thoughts, and generally I would, basically to sum up my last talk, is I would say that out of the gate in a new application, I would reach for context and just try to use plain React. And if I ran into problems with that, that's when I might investigate Redux. If you guys want to check out the slides for that, you can find them at my GitHub, which will be a link in my next talk. They're also on the React Maryland GitHub. I think it's forked over there. But tonight, I'm going to talk about code splitting with React. So to kick things off, the first thing you need to know about code splitting, or before you learn about code splitting, we have to talk about is the bundle. So the bundle is generally what tools like Parcel, Webpack, Rollup, Browserify, Gulp, whatever else has been there throughout the ages. It generates and concatenates all your files into one bundle and serves it to your client. As your app grows in complexity, or you add third-party libraries, your bundle size is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which has the adverse effect of slowing down dramatically your initial render and your initial load, because you have to wait on all those hopefully kilobytes or maybe megabytes to cross the wire and load into your client's browsers. So what is code splitting and why should you care? So code splitting is basically the process of taking that, what would normally be a single bundle file, and splitting it out into smaller chunks that can eventually be lazily loaded or
basically not loaded into your client's browsers until that code is needed. This basically enables you to have a much slimmer bundle served on the initial load, speeding up the, your first, or the time to interactivity, keep users on your page, and generally just makes a better experience for your users, especially if your users are on mobile or they're in like degraded network type situations. The downside of code splitting generally is that it increases the complexity of your application, especially up until the addition of React's lazy function. Previously to React doing that, you had to depend on third-party libraries such as React Loadable. You do get in the mess of messing with your Webpack configuration or rollup or whatever you're using. And generally, it added complexity to not only your backend, or not backend, but your build process, but also your front-end code when you're depending on these third-party libraries. So React Lazy was introduced in React 16.6. I think it came along with the introductory of the suspense API, which I'll talk about in a moment. React.memo, which basically lets you take your functional components and treat them as if you were using React.pure component, and then also, of course, lazy. So right out of the React docs, React Lazy takes a function that must call a dynamic import. This must return a promise which resolves to a module with a default export containing a React component. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying you're just deferring loading a component into your browser until it's actually needed on the screen. An important part of lazy loading is dynamic import. Currently, the dynamic import feature is not part of the actual ECMAScript standard or JavaScript. It's in stage 3 in TC39, which is the committee that essentially approves all the modifications to JavaScript as a language. I think there's 4 stages, so it's pretty far along and definitely going to be a part of the language either this year's release or next year's. Currently, dynamic import is supported by all your major bundlers, whether it's Parcel, Webpack, Browserify, Rollup, you name it, you got it. One thing you do need to include is Babel for transpiling that syntax to today's modern, or today's browser's version of that. Unfortunately, create React app, you can just start using React.lazy right out of the box without touching any configuration anywhere, and it just works. So this is what React Lazy looks like. You're going to essentially first import the lazy function and the suspense component from React. Rather than just normally importing your component, you're going to import it with a callback passed into lazy. Then wherever you want to render that component, you're going to wrap it in the suspense component. So basically, I'm going to talk about suspense in a minute. Actually, I think that's the next slide, so let's just jump to that. Quick word on suspense. Also right out of the docs, suspense lets components wait for something before rendering. Today's suspense only supports one use case, loading components dynamically with React.lazy. In the future, it will support other use cases like data fetching. I believe that the data fetching portion of suspense is going to come out with React 17. I have no idea when that release date is, but if you really want to get into the weeds with suspense, there are a couple flags that you can enable within React in its current version and play around with that, but there is the disclaimer that the APIs aren't stable. An interesting video to check out if you have interest in how data fetching will be handled in React in the future is to check out Dan Abramov's JSConf Iceland talk. And it's important to note, I'm going to show a demo here and do a little bit of live coding, is you're going to see a loading component, and the loading component is not showing up when I'm making network requests. It's showing up when I'm making requests to my server to request other bundles. In the future, it's going to be the other way around. Suspense will support the asynchronous loading of components via data fetching, but right now it's just for loading smaller split bundles. All right. So I built a little dummy app here. Basically, it's just going to retrieve user information from GitHub. It's pretty standard, just a form, put in Facebook or a GitHub username, search, get the profile information, get to the repositories and the stars. Nothing too crazy. If we look at the network requests right now, we're going to see basically two JavaScript resources coming across the line. So I can't remember which is which. One of these is your node modules, and one of these is your application bundle. So what I'm going to show with React Lazy and Lazy Loading components is we're going to split out this user profile component into its own bundle, and then also these repository list into its own component. Is the font size good for everybody? No complaints? Cool. So just to kind of go over what I have here quick, basically just an app component that on submit of that box makes a request out to GitHub. As long as that's good, it sets state that we got that data. The response has a link to the repos endpoint. So after we get the profile, we make another fetch to GitHub to get the repos, kind of a waterfall type effect of requesting. As we get this data back in my render, I have a little flag to indicate whether that component's ready to display. And then as long as it's ready to display, it just renders the component, passes the data. So if we were to introduce React Lazy to this, first thing we're going to want to do is import Lazy. From there, we want to basically defer loading this user component and this repos component until we absolutely need them on the screen. So just like that. Like that. Next thing we want to do is we want to come and wrap our components with the suspense component. And we want to do that because when that component is ready to load, we have to tell React, suspense lets React know that whatever is rendering between the suspense component, the children of the suspense component, may not be immediately ready to go. So you'll see when I code this, there's going to be a fallback prop on the suspense component. And while whatever the children are, while that's loading, it displays the fallback component. So if I import suspense now, come down and wrap our user profile, suspense, give it a fallback. I have a loading component that I made. Actually, is it even in this branch yet? Yes. So I just made a really basic loading component. Wrap that. Same deal with our repos component. And hopefully, God willing, that worked. Womp womp. Import
Your
in.
loading has to be above.
Of course it does. Cool. Well, hopefully. So now we should get a hard refresh. We get 2 bundles here. And hopefully, yep, there's the second and third bundle. And these files only contain the code for those components. Something that might make this a little bit more obvious is if we slow down our network connection. If I could get over to that. When we throttle our connection, you'll kind of see how suspense will fall back to that loading component. And this is kind of where you need to bear in mind that that loading component isn't there to show that it's loading the data from GitHub. It's there to show that it's requesting those smaller bundles from our server. Probably want to have that first one fast. So we slow it down now. Fall back, get our loader, get the data. You can see the next chunk come in. So that's pretty much the basics. And this is a pretty contrived example. And if you were paying any attention, you might actually see that we have more JavaScript. Our overall, if you aggregated our bundle sizes together, there's actually more code. Obviously, you're not going to want to wrap every single one of your components in this. And for a small app like this, you're generally not going to want to use this feature. But when you have, a single page application that might have many, many pages or, complex components that have a lot of code to them or component hierarchies, that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So you don't have to bring that across the wire on the first load for screens that people may never even get to when they're using your application.
Dylan, do you know how it's dynamically loading those script chunks?
I do not. I assume that is
Talking about that.
the React lazy under the cover. Yeah.
Is he just questioning everyone?
I mean, it's not really adding a script tag.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is it throwing script tags onto the page?
I don't think so. I had looked at that.
We have to hit actually look at the DOM in the dev tools.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I wonder if it's like
because elements.
What do you mean, the React dev tools?
Just the Chrome.
No.
Oh, you're talking right
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
No, it's not.
Interesting.
So I actually don't know how that's implemented under the covers. Right, so to summarize, lazy and suspense was added in 16.6. Lazy loading is enabled through code splitting, dynamic imports, and the suspense API. I just talked about some common use cases. Common use cases could be lazily loading each page view in your app, complex components or components that may be infrequently used. Modern tooling and React enables lazy loading with little complexity and can drastically reduce your bundle sizes and increase, or that should be decrease, not increase, load times. I included a bunch of resources, links to resources that if you guys are interested in adding this to your application, this is stuff I found useful when I was learning this. Stuff to React.js, Babel, the TC39 proposal. This YouTube link is to Abramov's React Iceland talk on suspense in general. Formidable Labs is a company that does JavaScript consultancy. They have tons of great open source products. They have this thing called Webpack Dashboard, which if you're not already using something to analyze your bundles, I definitely would recommend it. And then Carbon Now is just a tool I use to create snippets like this screenshot there. You can find all this code in this presentation and all the slides at my GitHub, Twitter, or email me. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints?
So, I see it's using, or it requires Babel. How far back browsers support can it go?
The Babel plugin?
Or no, the dynamic import.
I would imagine as long as you were using Babel, it would support pretty far back, whatever Babel's guarantee is, or whatever I guess your target browser is. been there.
Yeah. So while I can see this being a great use case, I don't know if I can.
So we target 31 also, and we've had no issues with any of our code being run through Babel.
So, can you only lazy load like components in your app? Like if I wanted to lazy load like Lodash or D3, is that something I can do?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. Like if you could point it at like a CDN or something.
Well, or even just like if you use Lodash in your application or something like that, but you just lazy load only whenever you need it.
You
So you're saying kind of like a module? So
Possibly
you have
you
files,
could.
a bunch of JavaScript functions.
I don't know why it would work any differently.
So, and then my other question would be, if, let's say I'm lazy loading something like that, like a component that I reuse in all my applications, and I lazy load in one component, but I forget to do it in another component, I'm
Right.
guessing I wouldn't get any of the advantages because I have to, because the lazy loading component would be in my main bundle if I forgot to do it in one place,
Yes.
right?
Yep. And what's nice also is that as you're navigating around your app, after that, if you use this component, let's say I had 3 other screens and I wanted to use this profile component across those screens, and I was sure to lazy load it in every place. Once it's loaded into your browser on the first time you encounter it, React is not going to make another call to your server. That's already cached there and you're good to go. In fact, actually I shouldn't say I'm willing to bet. I'd be interested to see if when I refresh here, if it just caches. Oh, looks like it's requesting it again. Yeah, so it still makes requests. So
So as long as you lazy load it on the first time, you could just import it regularly throughout the rest of your components because it would already be cached in the browser.
I don't know. I would think you would want to use
Then it would be
lazy
in
in
the
the other
bundle,
places
right?
you used it as well.
That makes sense.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Hi, my name is Greg. I work at Visionist. Worked here since June or so. It's my second meetup. Here today, I'm going to talk about hooks. It's the flavor of the month, apparently. The talk was originally supposed to be about the current and the future of hooks, but given that they actually released it to actual React, now I'm just going to talk about what it is now and where I think I see it in the future. So I put together a little demo. I don't have any slides for you guys. But so I basically just made a little web app. If you swap over to Chrome, go into the hooks demo, first tab. So this is our little demo app. If you click the snowflake, snowflakes will drop from the top to the bottom. If you keep clicking it, more snow will fall. It'll eventually lag out, but that wasn't the point of the presentation. So I wanted to talk about hooks and basically like how they're going to work and why you may or may not want to use them. I'm not going to stand here and say that you should convert your project to use only hooks and hooks everywhere. There's definitely a place still for regular components, like class components. I would say hooks is in its pretty primary state. That was a little weird wording there. It's pretty immature, I would say, though very powerful as well. So if we hop back over the code, we'll see that this is my snowflake component, which is defined. If we go down to line 19, we see export default memo. This is the same memo function that we were talking about before. It's essentially the same thing as using a pure component in a class component form. We pass in a size prop for the size of the snowflake. And line 20 and 21 are our first uses that are going to be using the hooks that we're now using in this function.
So this first hook called useState is going to be our replacement for essentially just getting something from a state, setting something with a state. You're going to use the format useState, which is imported from React at the top. It returns the value that you're going to set in the state and a setter function. General formatting is to name your variable and then have the setter be set your variable name. So x and then set x, y set y, that sort of scenario. And then what you can pass to useState is a default value for your state. So if I wanted to set x to be a default random location, which is that function up in line 12, or you can just set it to 0, which I did in line 21. Any questions about that so far, using state? Cool. So next hook in this component is the useEffect, which is going to be our version of component. Well, so useEffect is going to replace component will mount, component will update, and component will unmount. I think that's all three of the life cycles it replaces. Essentially what you're going to do is you're passing it a callback function that's going to do something when the component updates, mounts, or unmounts. There's a second parameter to that, which is right now an empty array. You're going to use the empty array if you want it to act as a component did mount, as in it's only going to run this useEffect when whatever I passed in this array. So I can pass in anything in my state, so x, y, or nothing. And you're basically going to bind that effect to changes to those variables. So if I only wanted that effect to run when x changes, I could pass in x into that array. Same thing with y, and if I leave it empty, it's never going to run except for the first component did mount. Any questions about that? So that useEffect is another keyword, just like useState. All right, and then the last part, we're just returning the snowflake, and we're setting the style based on the size and the x and y location that's up at the top. So my first thoughts about using hooks in this component was that it was very easy to pull out things that are unrelated to the state of my component. So like, rather than defining this constant snowflake style in my component, whereas it would have to re-render every time because I'm creating a new object, I can pull it out because it's not related to the state and pass it the values that it's going to act on. So I thought that made it I think using hooks makes it a little bit clearer what is and what is not related directly to your state. The other thoughts I thought, the way that the organization is, instead of having to use all these component will unmount, component will mount, component did mount, component will update, instead of having all these functions scattered around in your component, all of these use blanks have to be at the top of your function. So anytime you're using a useState or useEffects or use anything, because you can also create your own custom hooks, they have to be at the top of the function. So you'll always know where to look when things are changing or where state is defined. So I think it makes it very clear what the component is doing and what the state is at any given time. If we hop over to, oh, that's why I couldn't see it. Can you open snow? So this is just a very simple component. It's going to take out an array of snowflakes and render them all. Not much worth discussing there. I wanted to point it out before we head into the body that uses it. So we have some more hooks here. You'll again note that all the use states are at the top of the function. Use interval is at the top of the function. Use interval is a custom hook that was written for this project. It's based on a Dan Ebermov example that he wrote about hooks. But essentially that use interval is going to allow me to pass in a callback function, and instead of having the delay time be static for the remainder of the component being mounted, I'll be able to pass it in whatever delay that I want, and I'll be able to change it dynamically. But so we have two fields here. Snowflakes is going to be that array of snowflakes that we're keeping track of on the page. Number of snowflakes is a text field that we're going to allow a user to enter in a number, and then every time they click the snowflake, it's going to generate that many snowflakes at one time. So the default is 10. It can probably crash your browser at anything over 2,000 or something. But so after that use interval, we have the set snowflake number. So this function is our callback that we're going to do. Can you scroll down, please? A little bit, yeah, that's good. So that's our callback for the on change of our input. You'll see that it's taking the value from the input field, parsing it, checking if it's greater than 0 just to make sure. And then it's using that set num snowflakes, which is that setter function from the top where we define the num snowflakes variable. The add snowflake callback also works very similarly. It's going to take the existing snowflakes that we have, spread them, and then there's a little tricky way that we can generate an array of a certain number. So if I pass it 5 snowflakes, it's just going to give me an array of 5 and then run that map on 5. Probably unnecessary here, but basically we're just going to add that number of snowflakes, that number amount, and pass each one of them an ID and a size. The IDs are going to be used as keys for the components so that React can keep track of what is and what is not on the DOM at the time. This would be, the rest of this is pretty straightforward. I showed that snow component before that we're using. I'm using the same icon for the big snowflake button to add more snowflakes. And then that input box. So if we go back a little bit up, I'll show what we're sort of doing in that use interval custom hook that we created. Basically just a cleanup. Eventually, if you keep clicking that button, it's going to flood your screen with snowflakes. This is going to say every 10 seconds or so, we're just going to take off 50 of them until they're done, until they're out of snowflakes on the screen. Lastly, we have in this hooks folder. Here's my use interval custom hook. I would definitely recommend trying to separate out your hooks from your components so that you can reuse them. This one seems pretty useful to me in general. There's a website that I'll show in a minute that has probably thousands of different hooks that people have already written that have seemed pretty useful so far. But essentially what's going here, we're defining this hook that's going to take the same API as our set interval. So we're going to pass in a callback and a delay, and then every delay milliseconds we're going to run that callback. So the first thing that we do in this is we save a ref to the component that we are calling this custom hook from. So the reason we have to do that is because we need a reference that's going to persist between the component re-rendering over and over again. So we're calling it save callback, and then we're going to do a use effect. So basically, every time it updates, we're going to make sure that that callback is set to our reference variable, save callback.current. Then next, we have our use effects. So we're saying that every time delay changes, we are going to run this. Basically, we're going to set the callback to the reference that we had before, check if delay is not null. Then we're going to actually run our set interval function, keep track of that ID so that we can clean up on component will unmount. So this is the one thing I hadn't talked about yet. Every use, or never mind, I take it back. It is just use effects that has this. But when you return something from use effects, you can pass it a callback function to call when the component will unmount. So that's going to be a replacement for the component will unmount. You can do any cleaning up. So here we want to get rid of the listener that the interval was using. Any questions about this part? Cool. So if you hop over to Chrome, just wanted to show you. Well, so we saw the demo before. If you can show that increasing that number will indeed, you can probably safely do 100. I'm sort of curious if you can do 1,000. Okay, it's a little lag, but the performance things are always fun to go through and try to fix later. So those will clean up at some point from that set interval hook that we set. So if we hop over the hooks API reference, second tab, the React documentation is very, very good and thorough on this new hooks API. Even just starting from, like, rather than just like jumping right into the API reference, they even start with like an introduction of what these are, how they're going to help you. Basically, it's probably a little bit more in depth than what I just talked about, but there's a whole bunch of hooks that are built in, and then you can also create your custom hooks. So yeah, if you just click on any one of those, of course you click the one that I have not even read. That's fine. As you can see, they have pretty thorough explanations of how each one of these hooks works. It's not just like a one-liner of what this is and why you're stupid and don't know how to use it. So yeah, check out the docs. Those are very helpful. And then if we hit up the third tab, this usehooks.com has a bunch of user-submitted hooks that they've created custom hooks for. If you scroll up to that one that was up on the screen, this is just an example. So it's pretty painful sometimes to try to figure out why a component is updating, whether it's a prop changing, which prop is actually changing, if it's something in state is changing, which one. If you use this hook, it will console log it'll console log what changed in your component. So you just put this at the top of your function component, say use why did you update, and every time it updates, it'll console log what changed. So super helpful. Yeah, there's tons of these in there. Some are probably more useful than others. This one at the very top seemed the most useful for at least to show off in the demo. So yeah, definitely check that out. And Dan Abramov made a very, very good and thorough, it's like a hype up for hooks, and I think it's JSConf or one of them. but that's on YouTube. He goes very in depth of basically the documentation and more because he wrote it. Yeah, I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
So having played with hooks, how do you feel emotionally about them? Do you regret your pre-hook life and you want to convert everything to hooks for basically? Or?
I definitely wouldn't go back and convert everything. If I was starting a new project, I'd see how far I could get with only using hooks. But it doesn't seem worth it to go out of your way to make these hooks work when you could just use a class component. Maybe as we continue to get better with like understanding how these work and all the different workflows, there's if you go back to the API reference, just click 7 again. The use reducer. This is probably going to be your most powerful hook. You can pretty much do anything in it. That said, it's probably not advisable to do everything in it because it's just going to make it back to unclear code. So using like the use state and use effect is going to keep your code very clean, but use reducer, very very powerful. Sort of feels Reduxy, but obviously we don't need Redux in this scenario because we have use reducer. Yeah, as I said, I wouldn't go back and change them all. I think it's really cool and I think it's very clean. It feels cleaner to read. Just get a general sense of what a component's doing just right from the get-go.
You said there's no hook for get derived state from props, right?
There's no what?
There's no hook for get derived state from props.
I don't believe so.
So anytime you're going to need to do that, you have to use the class.
I am sure that there are ways to do it. I just don't know offhand. I don't think that they left any lifecycle methods out. I think that.
That one is. It's not.
Oh, you know that for a
Yeah,
fact.
it's not.
Oh, then I guess you would.
I don't know if you had mentioned it.
No, I haven't had to do that yet. What's up?
My question is, you kind of mentioned, there's still be use cases for class components, and I'm just kind of curious if you had any specific thoughts about those where maybe you also need to use get derived state from props. I'm not sure. Yeah, because React's documentation kind of says the same thing. It's like probably not bothering to go back and convert everything, but just like you were saying, if we're starting a brand new project, think about it, start a brand new project. I use them out again. I'm just curious if you would walk into any use cases where in this scenario you would definitely still want to use the class component. Maybe some of that's still being shaken out as people work on these things.
Yeah, if I recall the documentations for get derived state from props, it pretty much says you really shouldn't need to use this, but if you do, here's how you do it. So maybe that's why they left it out. But yeah, there are probably circumstances where you either need to do it, like use a class component, or it's just going to be faster to do the class component than figure out a workaround to use
One
hooks.
thing I was thinking, even though it doesn't make the code like messier with all the different lifecycle methods, there are at least semantic on some level. Like the concept that you were saying, like if you want to do something at the component div out stage, you kind of just got to know, you got to put it in that array or empty array. And same thing with like cleaning up and like you kind of just got to know that you got to put it in that callback.
I agree with that.
That was the only thought that I had of like, oh, there's, that's just another thing that you got to teach a new developer or whatever, hey, this is how it works. And you're going to have to do that anyway in the life cycle methods, but at least there's some of that semantic.
No, that's a very good point. And when I mentioned that it feels cleaner to read, it's because I know the API. I don't think that you could pass this off to any old like even a JavaScript developer and say like this, what is this doing? And they would just know offhand. So it's very much dependent on the API. Knowing it, it's not that big, but it can definitely get pretty complex. Okay, thank you.
All right, well, unless anybody has any like impromptu things they want to talk about, that's it. And I'll probably try and schedule another one for 3 months from now, which will probably turn into 4, but 3 months from now. And yeah, if you have any interesting ideas, please reach out over Meetup, and we'll try and get you in. I would love to get more people to participate. So yeah, thanks for coming. If there's any pizza, take it. Take the pizza.